Lake Mead has spent the last several years under intense public focus, but what we're seeing now in late 2025 is something very different from the storyline that dominated the past decade. Instead of another year of decline or stagnation, the reservoir has delivered an unexpected comeback. The latest reading from December 10, 2025 shows Lake Mead at 1,060.19 feet, a level that marks one of the strongest upward surges in recent years. It remains far below the full pool of 1,229 feet, but the direction, pace, and consistency of the increase have caught observers by surprise. Understanding this rise requires looking closely at the behavior of the lake over the past 12 months, and especially comparing 2025 to the patterns of 2023 and 2024 represented on the charts. If we start by examining the 2025 curve, the shape tells a very clear story. The year began around the mid-1550s, dipped briefly toward spring, then gradually recovered, held stable through the summer, and began strengthening through fall. By late November and early December, the rise accelerated, lifting the reservoir above 1,060 feet for the first time since early spring. This upward trend has been steady rather than erratic, and that consistency is one of the main reasons analysts describe 2025 as an unexpected comeback year. The comparison to last year makes this even more striking. In 2024, the yellow curve shows a strong early year peak above 1,075 feet, followed by a long decline that never fully reversed. In contrast, 2025 demonstrates not a spike followed by a collapse, but a controlled climb that still holds momentum heading into winter. Looking further back at 2023, the magenta curve reveals a very different pattern: a low starting point near 1,044 feet, a mid-year rise, and a slow stabilization into fall. When seen alongside 2025, it highlights just how much ground the lake has regained in 2 years. From around 1,044 feet in early 2023 to 1,060-plus feet today, the overall gain is substantial. Even if the lake remains far from its long-term historical highs, the fact that it's not only rising but doing so reliably marks a meaningful shift in its recent trajectory. The graphs show that 2025 has been the most stable year of the three. No dramatic drop-offs, no prolonged plateaus, and no disruptive reversal events. The short-term graph from mid-November to December 10 helps illuminate the pace of the current rise. Over roughly 3 weeks, Lake Mead climbed from the high 1,057-foot range into the low 1,060s, gaining more than 3 feet. The curve is smooth and upward sloping, indicating that conditions supporting the reservoir are consistent day after day. Even the change since yesterday note shows a positive gain of 0.06 feet, reinforcing that the upward momentum is still active and has not yet slowed. This kind of stability is rare for Lake Mead, which often reacts to demands, inflows, and operations much more visibly. When the lake rises steadily, it suggests inflow management, usage balance, and reservoir control are temporarily aligned in a way that favors storage rather than drawdown. But what really defines 2025 as an unexpected comeback year is the combination of 3 unusual characteristics: long-term steadiness, reduced volatility, and late-year strength. Most years show their strongest gains in the early part of the year, especially around spring. But in 2025, the lake's recovery continued late into the year, contradicting the usual seasonal pattern. By December, instead of leveling off or dipping, the lake pushed upward past 1,060 feet, signaling that conditions remained favorable. This late-season momentum is one of the key differences separating 2025 from 2024, which had already entered decline by the same point on the calendar. Another surprising detail is how narrow the fluctuations are during the summer months of 2025. The chart shows the lake hovering near 1,055 to 1,057 feet for almost 3 months, forming a stable plateau rather than a steep drop. This steadiness suggests that releases from Hoover Dam and system demands were balanced unusually well. Lake Mead is a reservoir that typically reflects the push and pull of inflows and outflows very quickly, yet 2025 shows a rare flattening that contributed to its eventual rise. When a reservoir starts late-year gains from a stable platform instead of a weak one, even modest inflow improvements create strong upward curves. Another important aspect is the contrast in the shape of the rising curve. On the recent month chart, the blue area forms a clean upward arc with minimal dips. This shows that whatever factors support the lake's increase, whether operational, hydrological, or upstream management related, have been running consistently in the lake's favor throughout November and early December. The absence of sharp downward adjustments implies strategic releases were maintained at manageable levels. For analysts who track Lake Mead's responsiveness to the Colorado River system, this kind of curve signals a well-controlled equilibrium. The level of 1,060 feet itself is significant in contextual terms. While well below historical averages, it pushes the lake decisively above its midsummer lows and marks one of the highest points of all 2025 outside the early spring peak. This sends an important signal. The lake is ending the year on an upswing rather than a decline. For many years, seasonal patterns show that reservoirs finishing the year strong tend to enter the next year with better potential for stability. That doesn't guarantee future performance, but it creates a psychological and operational advantage for water managers heading into 2026. Another factor contributing to the unexpected nature of the comeback is how differently each year behaves in the overlapping chart. In 2023, the rise didn't truly accelerate until the middle of the year. In 2024, the rise happened early, but the decline took over quickly. Only in 2025 do we see a slow start, a stable middle, and a strong finish. That sequence is rare, and it means the lake built momentum over time rather than depending on a single seasonal event. A sustained recovery, even if modest, is often more impactful than a dramatic spike because it reflects multiple months of favorable reservoir behavior. When comparing the year's peak points, 2024 clearly reached higher numbers than 2025, yet 2025 is finishing in much better condition. The 2024 curve peaks near 1,076 feet, then falls sharply. Meanwhile, 2025 never climbs that high, but maintains its gains far better. This difference between height and stability is crucial. A high peak that collapses quickly offers little long-term benefit. A smaller rise that holds steady or strengthens gradually often contributes more to overall system health. The 2025 curve tells a story not of a spectacular rebound, but of a reliable one. As we move deeper into December, the lake's trajectory raises natural questions about how far the recovery can continue. The charts show no signs of immediate slowdown. The current rise is ongoing, and although lake levels will always fluctuate with operations at Hoover Dam and upstream conditions, the short-term data strongly suggests that the reservoir is in the midst of a sustained upward phase. This doesn't imply that Lake Mead is approaching any historic highs, but it is firmly distancing itself from the sharp lows seen in years like 2022 and early 2023. The difference between operating at 1,044 feet, where the lake sat not long ago, and operating above 1,060 feet is major. It improves buffer capacity, enhances reservoir stability, and reduces system stress. These gains may not restore the lake to full capacity, but they create a safer operational cushion. Rising from the low mid-1042s to the low 1060s marks a meaningful step toward stabilization, especially for a reservoir as large as Lake Mead, where even a few feet represent tremendous amounts of stored water. In addition to the visible data, the timing of the rise can influence future expectations. An upward surge occurring in December rather than spring often creates momentum going into the start of the next year. As water managers know, although hydrological patterns can shift rapidly, entering the new year above 1,060 feet places Lake Mead in a stronger position than it held at the start of both 2024 and 2023. The reservoir's ability to maintain or expand this advantage will depend on multiple operational and upstream conditions, but the baseline is clearly improved. It's also crucial to consider how closely Lake Mead's performance ties into broader system operations. When the reservoir begins rising despite typical winter draw trends, it suggests a favorable balance somewhere upstream or in controlled release patterns. This kind of outcome doesn't usually happen by accident. It reflects a stretch of weeks where the lake's inflow exceeds its outflow. That balance, kept steady over time, is the engine behind the gentle but persistent climb depicted in the short-term chart. As viewers look at the data, the most important takeaway is not that Lake Mead has fully recovered, because it hasn't. The key is that the reservoir has broken away from a multi-year pattern of decline and is demonstrating a capacity to rebound when conditions permit. The lake is still more than 160 feet below full capacity, but the current rise shows that recovery is possible and measurable over relatively short time spans when the system aligns favorably. If this upward movement continues through the winter, the shape of the 2026 curve may start very differently from the curves of preceding years. Entering a new year at a higher elevation improves the lake's overall flexibility. While long-term recovery will take much more time, the current trend shifts the tone of analysis from how low will it go to how far can it climb. That alone marks a major narrative shift for a reservoir that has spent a decade being associated with decline. Ultimately, the story of 2025 at Lake Mead is not about breaking records, but breaking expectations. The lake didn't surge to dramatic highs, but it demonstrated control, stability, and a late-year rise strong enough to qualify as a genuine comeback. The numbers are modest in absolute terms, but powerful in context. Going from instability to consistency is one of the rarest and most valuable transitions a reservoir can make, and right now, Lake Mead is in the middle of exactly that transition. As we close out the year, the lake sits at 1,060.19 feet, a number that reflects not just a measurement, but a storyline. It is a reminder that Lake Mead is dynamic, responsive, and capable of recovery. The comeback of 2025 may be unexpected, but it is real, visible on the charts, and shaping the new narrative for the largest reservoir in the United States. The question now is not whether the rise happened, it clearly did, but how long the momentum will last. For now, the reservoir ends the year rising, and that alone makes 2025 a remarkable chapter in Lake Mead's modern history.